Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world. And so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing fabulously well. I'm doing great, thank you very much. And I'm so delighted to share a fabulous story with you this evening, because stories are just so spectacular. Nothing beats a good story, and nothing can send you better to sleep at night than listening to a lovely story. So before we get started, don't forget to go and get yourself that perfect drink. And before you do that, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up. And let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, I had not expected this, not for a single moment, but when the light shorted in the marquee, my heart missed a beat. Everything was swathed in such a haunting, airy, velvety blackness that only the bouncing flames from the candles cast their shadows across people's faces while shooting up the canvas walls. Their ethereal flickers only added confusion to the chaos. In a trice, the DJ's music became still, very still. And in the sound of such intense silence, the inward wailing screams of the guests could be heard. The wedding guests reach out, grabbing each other nervously, fumbling around for arms and shoulders to cling on to for support, as alarmed, frightened people are calling out each other's names in the darkness, feeling lost, vulnerable in this dusky void where a sense of hopelessness can so easily be found. "Freya, is that you?" cries one woman's voice as she navigates the darkness with her arms, doing breaststroke-like manoeuvres across the marquee. Voices sound frayed, pinched and nervous. Some have risen up a notch or two in volume to high-pitched squeals that sound much more like an animal noise than that of a human. It's difficult to distinguish the guests or to hear whereabouts they're located in the marquee, as the visibility is so diminished, and without even a cell phone light in the tent, you can't see a single thing. The bride insisted on no cell phones tonight. None were allowed at her wedding. The energy is cloying to the marquee like the barnacles on a turtle, fraught, tense, tight. The anxiety is at fever pitch, and many are wallowing in their terror, bathing in its blackness, tasting its sense of foreboding, drinking its saltiness, and sensing its deadliness. It would seem for many, myself included in this regard, it is as if we're almost locked under its spell, surrendering to its mighty power, resigned to the impending fate, or whatever it'll dish out for us tonight, because let's just say, the dinner that has been prepared by the chef's team, the head chef being my husband, in the outside tent next to the marquee, is possibly the last thing on people's minds right now, as rumbling stomachs screaming with hunger have been replaced by squirming guts that feel like hundreds of mice are gnawing away at your insides. Everyone is inwardly filled by a great angst, crying out to be rescued from this desolate abyss. In the merciless darkness, people struggle to find their friends, as amidst this uncongenial, treacherous ocean of black that has ravenously devoured the light, it is what you can't see that troubles you the most. For anything inauspiciously foreboding could be loitering in the dark shadows, waiting to pounce on an unsuspecting victim. For tonight's energy embodies all that is evil, malevolent, insanely wicked. And if I didn't know any better, I would say the devil and his minions had been invited to his wedding. It's difficult to even discern your hand before your face. An angry storm is raging outside the tent, only adding more fuel to the drama that is unfolding on this inauspicious night. It's building itself up into a frantic frenzy. It whips up from the ocean, soaring over the cliff so aggressively, shrieking and battering the marquee with a brute force, punneling it so hard that with every jolting shudder the whole marquee begins to groan and heave as the metal scaffolding vibrates and grumbles, almost as if in any moment now the marquee just might collapse on top of us. I hold my breath, hardly daring to believe that this is actually happening at my wedding venue, of all places. I would never have envisaged this happening in a million years, but it seems as if my worst nightmare has finally been realized. Maybe if I close my eyes very tightly again and squeeze them so hard and then open them, I'll find that this has all been
just a horrible dream. But this is no dream. This is real. The ties of the door have loosened, and they're flapping vigorously against the entrance. It's like we're claustrophobically cocooned and confined to this darkness, surrounded by the thunderous roar of the weather, beholden to its mercy. Every soul in this tent is poignantly aware of this fact, as you would be, of course, if you were in a plane that had lost its momentum and was now plunging towards the sea with only moments to spare. Danger is something innately built in all of us. We can sense and feel it, as everyone does in this tent right now. It seems so enigmatically strange, peculiar even, that only an hour before things had been so innocently benign. As in the fading light, after the people had left the chapel, they were served cocktails by waiters and waitresses, bedecked in the traditional black ensemble, and offering the guests light refreshments, served on large silver platters that were gratefully received by all. All this occurred while the guests, over 150 of them, observed photographs being taken of the bride and groom. Some stunningly dramatic pictures against the rugged, jagged rocks of the cliffs, where the bride's ethereal, floating, thin, wispy silken dress, so delicate, so fragile, so elegant against the rocks, conjured up pictures denoting hard with soft, dark with light, powerful with fragile. And as any photographer will tell you, taking pictures on this rugged, remote piece of coastline is every artist's dream come true. This afternoon the rising wind has only bespeckled the photographs with even more dramatic appeal and aplomb, with hair blowing back in the wind, and the floating waves of the bride's dress dancing against the rocky cliffs. You can't buy drama like this. If you were to attain it in Hollywood, it would cost you big bucks. But here on the wild Oregon coast, it's entirely free. For nature does not hold back on her advances, nor does she have much self-restraint when she gives, and when she does, her generosity is bountiful, and when she takes away, it can be deadly. A plethora of wedding guests stand there over the rugged coastline, like a colony of seals, watching the events unfold, with a glass of effervescent bubbly in their hands, and a canapé in their fingers. The little Bellinis, with cream cheese, salmon, and a spattering of caviar, are going down a treat tonight. Or this evening, shall I say. Of course, I wouldn't have expected less. I know what people enjoy. The guests are sipping their champagne, while drinking the saltiness of the sea air, appreciating the fabulous transfixing views that spread out before them like a resplendent painting. Their eyes feast on the satiny long white ribbon of beach that smoothly glides down the coastline like a golden asphalt road, while the rippling ocean, with its crashing tumultuous waves, some pounding against the sculptural rocks, generously caresses their foaming white froth over the cliff face, as if washing the dirty grime off a giant child's face. If your eyes sweep up to the very top of those cliffs, standing there proud and tall, like the crown on a king's head, is a large white 4-story Georgian house that can accommodate over 50 sleeping guests, a graciously proportioned classic building, with an understated elegance and a pleasing symmetry, based on the golden ratio, with generous white sash windows that stare out over the ocean, the beach, the vertical silhouettes of the trees, the rugged cliff face, like bright eyes that see everything and miss nothing. This is the illustrious wedding venue me and my husband own, that came into my possession by way of a rich inheritance from a great uncle of mine. Sometimes I have to pinch myself to assure myself it really is ours, for we are indeed lucky to own such a resplendent place in a remote part of the Oregon coast, renowned for some less than savoury weather conditions. But let's just not talk about that right now. As the sun begins to set, after a long hard day of shine, the guests audibly ooh and ah with delight, as a tangerine sun begins to melt into the sky, like liquid white chocolate, infusing the vast panoramic of firmament with a collage of colourful layers, from pinks, golds, mauves and purples, like bright colours being folded into a white glossy meringue. In a trice, as if by a flick of a light switch, the weather changes, as the sunset is swept away from the peninsula, which is now beginning to gradually deepen. slowly but surely, going at its own methodical pace, where hurry is certainly not invited. It develops a mottled grey appearance, accompanied by a grey sombre bleakness that does not smile warmly on the wedding guests, but physically scowls down at them, as if to deny them much welcome. A wind beats up from the coast, its ugly gnarled hands pulling at women's silk dresses, rudely tugging at their groomed, immaculate hairstyles, and biting viciously at their cheeks. I instruct everyone to get to the marquee as quickly as possible. The guests don't need much prompting. They clutch elaborate hats, graced with feathers and silken flowers to heads. They pull skirts down modestly with hands, and then they tear high-heeled shoes off feet to increase their pace, as they dash fervently across the soft green turf towards the marquee, sighing with relief to be cushioned from the cruel blows of the unforgiving weather. Welcome to the safe confines of a magnolious, splendacious canvas that has been transformed into a glorious, glamorous den, with beautiful arrangements of flowers scattered liberally throughout the tent, tables laid in golden red finery, and a coconut matting that resembles a rustic carpet glides across the floor, like a rich red turf. The perfect nesting place for very tired feet. The guests this evening are obliviously unaware that things are going to get so much worse tonight, a whole lot worse. But then ignorance is bliss, until of course you're caught up in the eye of the storm, when your naivety will almost certainly not serve your best interests well. But let's not talk about that yet, as the guests are gathered and the wedding speeches are about to progress. In truth, I can't remember how many wedding speeches I've had to sit through over the years. Some of them can drone on and on, like a static radio you wish you could shut up. Sometimes even the guests can't hide the boredom creeping across their faces, as they fiddle awkwardly with glasses. But I know what they're thinking. I've seen it in their eyes all too often. "Make it short, please make it short," they inwardly beg. It's going to be interesting what the bride's mother has to say. I notice she's twitching nervously as she walks up to the front of the tent to face the seated gathering of people, as all eyes are fixed on her. I'd place the bride's mother as being in her late 40s, an attractive woman with a short, stylish hairstyle swept away from her face, highlighted in pretty honeys, blondes and chestnuts, wearing a turquoise blue slip of a dress that flatters her. It's got that bohemian floating quality to it that dances around her ankles prettily. She stands there nervously, clenching her fists so tightly that I can actually see the whites of her knuckles showing. I can tell she'd rather be anywhere else in the world than standing in front of the crowd of people right now. I can see the bride and the groom are smiling up at her encouragingly, as if to whisper, "You can do it! You can do it! We believe in you!" She seems uplifted by their blind faith in her. The bride's mother takes a sip of champagne for a twist of Dutch courage, I suspect, to steady her frazzled nerves, and then places it down on the table. The glass, I mean. All eyes remain focused on her, and the only sound that can be heard is a soft wind beating against the tent. But nothing to be bothered about yet. Not yet. I mean, this is the coast after all, and people expect a wee bit of wind in these parts. It goes with the territory, and maybe even adds to the ambience. That is, of course, if the weather remains pleasingly subtle. But tonight the guests will learn that there is nothing subtle nor amenable about the windstorm tonight. The bride's mother puts the cordless microphone to her lips. "I'd like to welcome everyone to the wedding of my daughter Victoria and her husband Charlie." Everyone claps, and a few whistles serenade the proceedings that seem to give the bride's mother a much-needed boost of confidence that is clearly well needed. She giggles nervily in the microphone. "You think I'd be good at this by now, wouldn't you?" she jokes. "After all, I've done 2 speeches before, but in the last 5 years or so. I mean, you'd think I'd be a dab hand at this by now, but as you can see, I'm trembling," she says, stretching out her arm to the crowd to demonstrate this point. It is true, her hand is actually shuddering. "I've never been good at facing a crowd, even with such a sea of kind, warm faces greeting me, looking at me with such bright, sunny expressions. Many of you who I do know well. I know what you're all thinking. Has my daughter finally found the one? Well, I can only say that when I first met Charlie, I was in no doubt my daughter had struck gold. Charlie is the type of gentleman that will keep you on your toes. Victoria gets easily bored, but let's just say Charlie will keep her guessing. My daughter needs that in a man. I'm sure my husband is looking down at us from heaven, smiling down on the proceedings tonight. If he was here, sweetheart, he would have been so very proud of you to see you now, and how magnificently beautiful you look in your stunning fishtail wedding dress that becomes you so well. It's been a year since my husband Victoria's father died so fortuitously, and my daughter has been my greatest strength for me during this time. Thank you, sweetheart, for that. The bride's mother's eyes meet her daughter's, and her daughter nods and smiles in response, as if acknowledging the tough time they'd shared together after the bride's father's passing. She continues, I will confess that even as a child my daughter couldn't keep still, had to be doing things all the time. I was surprised she didn't have that ADHD they talk about, but she didn't. It would seem she's just an incredibly adventurous person. I think she's found her match in Charlie here. So let's raise our glasses and give the happy couple a toast to a long and happy marriage with lots of excitement. And a couple of grandchildren on the way would be very, very much appreciated. I'm certainly looking forward to becoming a grandmother. The couple sitting next to me, on the table next to mine, snigger to themselves. A woman whispers to her husband, I'll give it less than a year, she chides. Victoria will have spat him out by Christmas. I can see the bride's mother knocking back the champagne, quickly being congratulated for her bravery and courage by both the bride and groom, who are talking to her earnestly, possibly praising her effusively for the speech with a plethora of well-dones. You know, the usual thing. The bride's mother is smiling, looking as if the entire weight of the world has been lifted off her shoulders. She really didn't want to do that wedding speech. Little does she know how very soon her little speech is going to seem like a walk in the park. The best man walks assertively over to the podium, grinning brightly. He moves with a confident swagger and a sanguine gait, with none of the nervous, self-effacing insecurity of the bride's mother. None of that clouds his delivery in the slightest. You might think his audacious self-confidence was cocky or arrogant, but not so. I think he's just naturally a very extrovert character, with a convivial personality that people naturally warm to. It seems that the crowd at this wedding party really love him. Welcome, everyone, he says. I'm so glad you could make it. Let's not kid, it's windy out there. But then that would be expected at this time of the year, and by the coast, of course. I am informed that this location is particularly exposed to the wind, situated out here in such a wild spot. When Charlie informed me that he and Victoria were going to have their wedding at a gorgeous location, a Georgian house perched on a cliff face overlooking the Oregon coast, I had no idea it would be this transfixing. But you've surprised us, Charlie, as usual. This place is a treasure. It almost feels as if we're stranded together, all of us wedding guests, on a deserted island, which gives a very romantic quality to the wedding tonight. I'm sure you will agree with that. Hear, hear, cry the guests, clapping. Well, for those of you that are less acquainted with me, let me just say I've known Charlie all my life. He's always been the intrepid explorer, so to speak. We've ended up in all kinds of scrapes together over the years. So yes, I would say Charlie is one of those people that gets rather bored too easily. So like Victoria, they both have a lot in common there. The girls, of course, have always been attracted to Charlie, for some absurd, unfathomable reason. He raises a cheeky eyebrow, rolls his eyes at the back of his head, and jokes. I can't, for the life of me, figure out why. Everyone claps, cheers and giggles. No, we can't imagine why, comes one woman's voice from the crowd. We can't possibly imagine why. Just look at him. Yes, you're right there. Look at him, chuckles the best man. Let's just say with Charles' bouncing blonde curls licking his collar, And those lapis lazuli blue eyes, he's been pushing the girls away for ever and a day. But not Victoria here. When Charlie told me he'd met someone, he said it with such a solemnness, it got my attention at once. Charlie hasn't been serious about anything a day in his life. So when his deep voice told me on the phone, I've met someone, I knew this was the one. Of course, when I met Victoria, I could see why they were so good together. They complement each other. They're adventurous, ambitious, curious, inquisitive, with a passionate zeal for life. He raises his glass to the bride and groom. May you both have a long, happy marriage. Oh, and I know I'm expected to say a joke, am I not? What every best man is supposed to do, I believe. I have a couple for you here, he says, pulling out a crumpled piece of paper from the back pocket of his pants. He reads the jokes to an ebullient, very responsive audience. Every time a little boy went to a playmate's house, he found the friend's grandmother deeply engrossed in the Bible. Finally, his curiosity got the better of him. He asked his friend, Why do you suppose your grandmother reads the Bible so much? I'm not sure, he says. I think she's cramming for her finals. Everyone laughs, claps and cries, More! 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 Just as well I came prepared, says the best man, reading another joke on his paper. I knew you would be a tough crowd to please. It seems I was right. Here goes. At the wedding party, the young woman admonished her husband. That's the 5th time you've gone back for ice cream and cake. Aren't you a little bit embarrassed that you look like such a greedy pig? I wonder what people are thinking of your insatiable greed. Well, why should I be bothered in the slightest, he says. I just tell everyone that the puddings are for you. Everyone roars and claps. More! 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 All right, one more, he grins, and then that's that. Nothing looks good on me anymore, wailed a customer, modelling an outfit she was planning to wear to a wedding in front of the department store mirror. Nonsense, ma'am, says the sales clerk. The dress says it all. That's the problem, says the woman. I need a dress that keeps its mouth shut. Everyone cheers, and then the groom walks up to the podium, pats his best friend on the back, thanking him for the speech, and then he proceeds to take the mic. Thank you, everyone, for coming here today. As all of you know, I have no parents here today to deliver any speeches. They're both in Rwanda, dealing with the victims of trauma, a decade after the war, suffering from serious post-traumatic stress disorder, which means many are requiring seriously psychological treatment, upon which my parents are the pioneers of some cutting-edge breakthroughs in post-traumatic stress disorder therapy. So they're currently working with doctors out there, rebuilding the psychiatric facility for the seriously depressed. And so although they would like to be here today, they have far more pressing issues to address. He pulls out a paper from a pocket and reads the letter to the wedding crowd. Me and my wife can only apologise for not being at your wedding ceremony today, but our love and wishes are for you both to have a long and happy marriage. We love you both very much. The groom seems to tear up, but holds his composure. Anyone can see he adores his parents and is bitterly disappointed they're not here for his wedding. But he overcomes his sorrowful reflection and courageously trudges on with the speech. I'm not much of a speaker, said the groom, so forget long speeches. You're not going to get one from me. Besides, I hate long speeches. But I do want to thank you for coming today to celebrate my marriage to my beloved Victoria. Victoria, he says, looking directly at the bride, giving her a lovely winning smile, showing off his sweeping mouth with the whitest teeth that I've ever seen, that let's just say are a tad too perfect, perhaps. But his smile is so genuinely broad. It could almost bounce off his face like a rubber ball. If he's not careful, that is. His magnificent blue eyes are pinned onto her brown ones, never leaving them for a single moment. She beams back at him brightly. Her eyes are locked in his adoring gaze. She raises her glass. They've definitely got chemistry, I decide. But it's early days, and chemistry is not the long-lasting glue that necessarily holds a marriage together. Although it helps. It definitely helps. I should know. I've seen so many weddings come and go over the years. You get a sense about these things. Is this marriage going to last? I ask myself, as if examining the odds of a horse race at the Derby. I'm not sure. It looks promising, but I've learnt from the knocks and shocks in my own life that looks can be exceedingly deceptive. The good news about the wedding today is it's all under my control, which gives me a small measure of power. It's my day to play God. Our lives are messy. Everyone knows that. But I can make the next 24 hours of this bride's life go idyllically, like the most perfect consummate dream. I am rather like, shall we say, Cinderella's fairy godmother, even without a pumpkin at my disposal, or a pair of glittering silver slippers. I do a pretty mean job, even if I say so myself. I'm very good at what I do. No point in pretending otherwise, or trying to hide my light under a bushel. What happens after that is their concern, not mine. That point of the journey is entirely up to them. I can, however, curate the next few hours of their lives and make everything flow seamlessly. I'm delighted to say that everything is running smoothly. My husband, as per usual, has excelled himself in his culinary performance this evening, but that doesn't surprise me at all. I wouldn't expect less from him. We make an excellent team, the two of us, as husband and wife. Tonight he has masterfully prepared the exemplary meal, with his usual je ne sais quoi, or amazing flair. The guests tonight are going to be treated to a phenomenal dining experience they shan't easily forget. But then the bride and groom have deep pockets. They paid for the very best in everything, not skimping on a single thing. I love customers like that, who don't try and haggle with me, or try to bring down the price. It does make my life so much more easier. I've had my share of difficult brides over the years. It goes with the territory of being a venue organiser. I've been made to run around the place like a headless chicken. I'm glad the bride and groom tonight have been a lot less challenging than some of my more demanding couples. The bride insisted on not having a band, not even for the pre-wedding drinks, which is a tad unusual. But each to his own, as I always say. I want disco music, she says. Everyone likes disco music that they can dance to. I find bands so boringly dull, I can't stand them. Whether the groom agrees with her or not, he's not saying. After all, what the bride wants, the bride gets. No questions asked, no protests raised. There are only 50 guests staying in the Georgian house tonight. The other 100 will be making their way back home the way they arrived, by car, Uber or bus, I imagine. I did glance at the weather gauge on the wall. It said overcast. I did think of taking it down so as not to alarm the bride. But then overcast is not something to get your knickers in a twist about, is it? It's commonly overcast around here. But what I've not told the bride about our location is that it is vulnerable to blustering wind conditions that can get a little rambunctious. But the less said about that, the better, of course. Everyone can hear the wind wailing out there. But it's not threatening, nor is it out of control. I've always had everything under control myself. Well, that's what I always used to think. But after tonight is complete, I will soon learn that the control for a wedding is not always in my hands, and that even a fairy godmother cannot orchestrate the weather. Thank you, the groom continues, for making me the happiest man in the world, Victoria. And thank you, everyone, for coming here tonight to celebrate our very special occasion, especially those of you who travelled far to get here. We're exceedingly grateful and glad that you've joined us. The groom raises his glass. Everyone cheers. Now a toast to all of you, to absent friends who cannot be here today. I can see the bride wiping a sorry tear away from her face. She's clearly not wanting to mess up her perfectly applied makeup that has been lacquered to her face with a neat precision by, I believe, one of Cannon Beach's most illustrious makeup artists, usually only hired by the rich and famous. So no, she can't mess that makeup up. That would be a grievous mistake, would it not? And possibly ruin all her wedding photographs with black blotches running down her skin. I must admit the couple has hired a very attentive photographer. I don't know where they got him from, but he's snapping away as if he's got ants in his pants. I think he's gay, which is why the brides seem to love him so much. Well, to put no finer point on it, he's definitely gay. He hasn't stopped for a moment. He keeps waving his arms around frantically. He looks like a temperamental artsy-fartsy type that would probably throw a fit if the bride was having a bad hair day. I was told in confidence that he was asked to take some rather naughty poses of the bride in her lingerie this morning, as a last-minute gift she decided to give her husband. But I gather he went a tad further than that, and did a whole shoot for her on the cliff face. I could see after the session he appeared to be quite enervated. He started to kick back rather too much French champagne. I imagine the shoot rather pandered to his artistic leanings, and delighted him somewhat. Despite his alcoholic indulgences, he seems pretty steady on his feet. That is, if you take away his swirling arms, that rather remind me of an octopus tentacles, as they swing precariously all over the place. I did notice he knocked a couple of people's champagne glasses out of their hands earlier on, and got a few irritated sideways glances, but it's water off a duck's back to him. He doesn't care. I know the bride's thinking of her father who was killed in a motorbike accident a year prior. I can see that nostalgic, wistful, longing look on her face. She so wishes he was here. Of course she does. There'll be no father-daughter dance for her tonight. Little do I know that tonight there will be no dancing for anyone at all. In fact, a dancing will be the last thing on people's minds, for they will be entertained by things a whole lot more sinister than that. No, this is a wedding party that will never be forgotten, but not in a good way. The groom continues in his monotone voice, that becomes initially more interesting and arrests the crowd's attention the moment food is mentioned. People are very transparent the moment you mention food. There's always a hopeful glint in people's eyes, and an upward tug on the corners of the mouth, a suggestion of a smile that they are fighting to suppress, because they don't want to seem too eager about eating. "I hope you're hungry," he says. "The food tonight is delicious. Another reason we chose this venue, as our great chef tonight is married to the owner of this venue, and he has a James Beard Award behind him. Nothing to be sneezed at. To keep you on the breast of things, we're starting with foie gras, with rhubarb and duck or chilled watercress and lettuce velouté, with scallops or cheese soufflé with cranberry compote. And for the mains, it's Dexter beef served with Jerusalem artichokes, venison leg cooked in hay, or partridge with pears. And then for pudding, my wife here has insisted on molten lava cake with homemade vanilla ice cream. As usual, it had to be something chocolate." I sigh with relief as the waiters arrive on the scene to start studiously serving the delicious menu, starting of course with the hors d'oeuvres, but singling out the vegetarians first at this wedding party for their unique orders. Soon champagne is being generously poured out, voices are humming away happily, people are laughing, there's much merriment. And then, of course, they're eagerly tucking into their first courses, marvelling at the deliciousness of the food. The DJ is playing his background music. The ambience is very congenial and very uplifting, until, of course, the lights go out. Everything is in darkness. Never in a million years at a venue had I expected this to happen. It did happen on one occasion, but the lights bounced back so quickly. But not tonight. Everything is now steeped in an ominous blackness that is so tangible it almost seeps through your clothes into every cell of your body, sending spiralling chills down your spine. This does not feel good. Perhaps I'm not so in control as I thought as a wedding planner. For one thing, I can execute no power over the weather, or the electrics for that matter, if they get shorted in a very bad storm. And by the looks of things, this is not just any storm. Suddenly I feel powerless, like the fairy godmother who has had her magic powers extricated from her, and has to surrender to a greater, deadlier power that is out of her control to manipulate or conquer. This is not funny. Not funny at all. So there we are. We're at the end of part 1. This is a terribly, terribly exciting story, so make sure you don't miss part 2 tomorrow. Until next time, goodbye and good night.